This is going to be part 2 of my boxing scoring series. In this one, I'm going to be focused on the system that I developed, this kind of way of looking at boxing scoring. And I used the last vid as kind of like a springboard for ideas and to get into arguments and kind of refine my perspective, because I already was thinking of this prior to this. But in the background, you see this scoring vid that I've been asking everybody to go watch, but instead I'll put it right in front of you so you can watch it while I'm talking. So the most important thing to start with is the definition of damage, because in all of combat sports, regardless of what it is or how it's being performed, there's this idea of damage, and damage changes from sport to sport. But in boxing, damage is going to be, I'll start off by saying cuts and bruises are superficial forms of damage, meaning that they correlate to the end of a fight, but they don't correlate to the end of a fight, but they aren't in a cause and effect relationship with the end of a fight. I would say that the loss of motor and cognitive functions is under significant damage, because the most definitive way to end a fight is in a knockout. Why? Because when you knock someone out, they can do nothing to defend themselves, right? They've lost their consciousness and the ability to control their body. And then from there, we start going down like a tier list of connected pieces to a knockout, where we lose motor and cognitive functions in varying degrees. So knockdown, right? Because if you get knocked down, that's significant, because this is a stand-up sport where being able to stand is the most, like, it's a necessary part, right? And then from there, it gets a little bit more nebulous and hard to pin down. But getting rocked and wobbled, right, where you lose control of your legs or other limbs for a few seconds, that's under the category of significant damage. And that's under the same category because it presents the same effects of loss of motor and cognitive control, but to a lesser degree than KOs and knockdowns. So, and I admit that after we get past these points, the system becomes more subjective. The whole reason I made the system is because damage is something we can objectively measure and see, but the less damage there is, the more subjective it gets. But if we start from that objective point and then look at the criteria from that objective point, we can have a more consistent scoring system. Okay. I say it also accounts for body shots, because when you're hit to the liver or the solar plexus and you like roll onto your knees or you roll up into a ball, you literally lose control of your body. You're in a fight or flight state mentally, and you can't get up, right? Like that's what liver shots and sometimes solar plexus shots do. Solar plexus shots, you can't breathe and you're in a lot of pain, and you're like some people have seizures and stuff like that. But and somebody mentioned a great point about how the right hands to the body from Devin, they were hitting the floating ribs, and when you hit the floating ribs, it causes bruising, and that bruising makes it harder to breathe. I'm like, okay, that's a great point. But bruising makes it harder to breathe. My response would be related to the performance of the fighter in the late rounds. Is their output lowered? Are they being bullied or controlled as far as ring generalship or effective pressure goes? Simply put, if the fighter is not showing noticeable reactions, they are fighting at the same pace or better and enforcing their style as the ring general, then we cannot rate the body shots high on the damage scale. With headshots, we have a direct causal or cause and effect relationship to damage. With some body shots, we have the same thing. So for one, you have to prove the body shots are slowing the fighter down. And then for two, you have to prove that them being slowed down meant enough to change other significant aspects of scoring around, like aggression, punches, and ring generalship. So effective aggression. So I laid out all this damage stuff. It took me 4 minutes, which is way too long. I laid out all this damage stuff. Now let's get into how this applies to the rules. Effective aggression. Fighters who consistently land powerful, clean shots that lead to knockdowns or rock their opponent would demonstrate effective aggression in terms of causing damage. And I put in parentheses, or elicit strong involuntary reactions. That's effective aggression. Ring generalship. By dictating the pace and control of the fight, a boxer can strategically position themselves to land hard and clean punches while avoiding their opponent's attacks. This in turn enhances their ability to inflict damage and minimize the damage they receive, thereby bolstering their overall effectiveness in the ring. Defense. Fighters who successfully minimize the damage inflicted upon them while effectively damaging their opponents would exhibit strong defensive skills. Hard and clean punches. This is obvious. Powerful and well executed shots that result in knockdowns or rocking the opponent or other significant signs of damage. And then one thing that was interesting about the system is like this dilemma of let's say you have a Linares versus Haney round 10. And this is why I developed a second part to the scoring system. You have the live part, which can be very subjective if there's very close rounds, and I'll talk about that in a second. We'll go back to this video. I'm taking a lot of time. The retrospective part, where you go after. So live, you look at the fight and you don't have the context of the fight. You're going round by round. But retrospective, you have the context of the entire fight, and you kind of are able to look at rounds and be like, well, you see the investments and stuff like that, and you see everything different. So there's, let's say, Linares versus Haney round 10, which is where Haney got rocked at the very end of that round. You could score that round for Haney because he was winning that round pretty cleanly, at least in my opinion. And then he got wobbled at the end, but it didn't really change anything in that round. However, retrospectively, if you were to go back, it might be different from a live scoring, because you might see that in rounds 11 and 12, how Haney was behaving completely different. His style was, his ring generalship changed. He wasn't landing as many hard and clean punches. He was getting pushed around, and he was getting bullied a lot more by Linares, and he was getting caught a lot more. He wasn't looking as good. So it's like, well, maybe you could change that round to Linares, but I don't know if I would. That's subjective, I admit it. And so this is the final part I'll cover. Upon the first watch, there's a lot of subjectivity, and if the punch stats are even and no one is showing signs of significant damage, at that point it's up to the onlooker to rate the damage effectiveness of punches based on the reactions of fighters. So I'm saying that if the punch stats are even and no one's showing any signs of significant damage, it's up to you to subjectively determine that. So there is subjective parts to this. However, if there are signs of significant damage later on in the fight, for example, let's say fighter A gets rocked by fighter B. This is Loma versus Devin. Loma rocked Devin a couple times in round 11, at least once. What was it, like a minute 40? I don't remember. And it's like, okay, this is what we do retrospective scoring. Live, this isn't gonna affect the rest of the rounds because we already have scores for those rounds. But after we watch the fight live and we want to go back, we can do retrospective scoring, which we look at the context of what happened. We look at round 11, we look at that rock, and we look at round 12, we look later down the line, and we judge those early rounds with that context. And and we can say that Loma had a more effective offense because they both were making investments. I made this argument so many times now, but they both were making investments. Devin Haney making investments to the body, Loma making investments to the head. And there's only two options to why Loma rocked Devin. Either his investments to the head was breaking Haney's chin down and he finally wore it down enough to rock him, or Loma was always hitting hard enough to rock Devin and he finally found a clean enough shot to do it, which means that those other shots that were clean were significant in the first place. They just didn't reach the level of significance to get a rock. So those are the only two options that make sense, right? So I think that is all. I was gonna go into more stuff, but I took a lot of time. So this is the new perspective on scoring that I've developed. This is probably how I'm gonna score fights. And so this is the Sweet Science Lab, man. Real nerd shit, if I'm being honest with you. Real nerd shit. Immortality Serum out.
Immortality Serum is the faction. Plenty entertainment if you asking. Gamer commentary and reactions. There ain't no faking, neither is the capping. It just goes lights, camera, action.